Welcome back, gore lovers. This is Sadistic Statistics, and welcome to Skidmore, Missouri. Population 444, give or take, folks moved away. Known for absolutely nothing except maybe Ken Rex McElroy. Imagine a town where everyone knows your name, your darkest secrets, and the exact number of times you borrowed a tractor without asking. That was Skidmore, and Ken Rex was its conductor of chaos. Picture a man who could make a parking ticket look like a declaration of war. That was Ken Rex, except replace the parking ticket with, well, pretty much anything. He wasn't just a thorn in the side of Skidmore. He was the whole damn cactus. His legend, bigger than a 10-gallon hat in a thimble factory. He was the boogeyman parents warned their kids about, except this boogeyman liked to sue people over spilled milk. Literally. Ken Rex wasn't born bad. Some say he was assembled in a factory using spare parts from a junkyard dog and a rusty bear trap. He had a gaze that could curdle milk and a smile that could make a loan shark check his wallet. From petty theft to assault, he dabbled in everything, treating the law like it was a suggestion, not a rule book. He was the human equivalent of a kick-me sign that no one dared to kick, at least not twice. The best part? He seemed to enjoy the town's fear. He fed off it like a mosquito at a nudist colony. The angrier folks got, the wider he grinned, making you wonder if he had a portrait of himself hidden in his attic that got happier every time someone in Skidmore cried. Now, even the devil likes a little company, right? Enter Trina McLeod, a young woman who must have had a thing for bad boys, and we're not talking James Dean Cool. We're talking might steal your lawnmower and then sue you for leaving it out in the rain bad. Their love story could fill a true crime podcast, complete with dramatic music and hushed whispers.
She was 14. He was 20-something and looked every day of it. He shot her parents' house up because they didn't approve. Romance.
The kicker? They lived happily ever after. Well, as happy as two people constantly on the run from the law, dodging tomatoes at the grocery store and using court summons as wallpaper could be. Ken Rex lived by a simple code, his way or the highway, and he usually owned the highway. He terrorized the town with impunity, making even the bravest soul think twice about leaving their houses unlocked. He'd steal your livestock, then offer to sell you back the meat. He was the ultimate entrepreneur of other people's belongings. The cops? Let's just say they were less than effective. Picture a game of whack-a-mole, but the mole had a law degree and a knack for disappearing acts. Ken Rex was the Houdini of small-town crime, leaving a trail of frustration, broken laws, and empty beer cans in his wake. Ken Rex wasn't born under a bad sign. He was born under a sign that said, "Caution may spontaneously combust into criminal activity." One of 14 kids, yeah, 14. He was like the extra sock in life's laundry basket. No one was quite sure how he got there, and everyone wished he'd just disappear. Childhood for Ken Rex wasn't about building tree houses. It was about dismantling the neighbor's porch for fun. He had a knack for finding trouble, like a bloodhound sniffing out a misplaced misdemeanor. Some say he peaked in kindergarten when he stole the teacher's prized apple and used it to play baseball with the classroom hamster. The hamster, surprisingly, was fine. The teacher, not so much. It was a sign of things to come, a harbinger of chaos in Oshkosh Bagosh overalls. School was not Ken Rex's forte. He was more interested in setting things on fire, literally and figuratively, than in the Pythagorean theorem. He treated detention like a spa day and suspension like an extended vacation. He dropped out faster than you can say juvenile delinquent, which ironically he was. It was like watching a one-man production of How to Ruin Your Life before you're old enough to vote. Jobs? He tried them on for size, like ill-fitting pants, before quickly discarding them. Farmhand, mechanic, short-order cook. Each occupation ended the same way, with Ken Rex walking out, usually with someone else's wallet or toolbox. Ken Rex's rap sheet read like a grocery list of petty crime vandalism, theft, public intoxication. He was a walking, talking example of why they invented the do not engage warning label. But here's the thing about Ken Rex, he was slippery. He could talk his way out of a paper bag, especially if he'd just stolen that paper bag from you. The cops knew him by name and probably by his favorite brand of cigarettes. He treated the legal system like a revolving door, strolling in and out with the nonchalance of someone picking up a gallon of milk. Judges sighed when they saw his name. Lawyers used him as a cautionary tale, and the local jail considered naming a cell block after him. His first real arrest was for stealing a pig. Not just any pig, mind you, but a prize-winning hog named Babe, after the Talking Pig movie, which Ken Rex had never seen because, well, reading. He was caught, pig in tow, trying to barter the poor creature for a case of beer and a pack of smokes. The judge, probably tired of seeing Ken Rex's smug mug, let him off with a warning. A warning Ken Rex promptly used to light his next cigarette. The pig incident was a turning point. It was like Ken Rex had tasted freedom, or at least the thrill of evading it, and he wanted more. He was like a shark smelling blood in the water, except the shark was wearing overalls, and the blood was probably ketchup from a stolen hot dog. Word got around about Ken Rex. He was like a bad penny, turning up in the most inconvenient places, usually with his hand in someone else's cookie jar. He was the human equivalent of stepping on a Lego painful, unexpected, and likely to make you swear. His crimes escalated, stealing tractors, vandalizing businesses, even shooting at the tires of a school bus, thankfully empty, because even Ken Rex had some standards, maybe. He was a one-man crime wave, and the town of Skidmore was drowning in his wake. People started locking their doors, their cars, their pets. Some folks even resorted to hiding their valuables in plain sight, figuring Ken Rex was too busy breaking the law to actually look for anything. By the time Ken Rex hit his 20s, Skidmore was officially on the Ken Rex McElroy diet plan. Live in fear, lose weight because you're too nervous to eat. He was the ghost that rattled their chains, the itch they couldn't scratch, the bad smell that lingered long after he'd left the room. He was a legend, sure, but not the kind you brag about in bars. He was the kind of legend whispered around campfires, the kind that made parents clutch their children a little closer at night. And Ken Rex? He loved it. He thrived on the fear, the notoriety, the fact that he could clear a room faster than a skunk at a garden party. He was the king of his own twisted castle, and Skidmore was his reluctant and increasingly terrified court. Even outlaws need groceries, but for Ken Rex, a simple trip to the store was less about milk and eggs and more about a power trip with a shopping cart. He'd waltz in, a smirk plastered on his face, and treat the aisles like his own personal buffet line, sampling grapes, opening chip bags, and leaving a trail of crumbs and chaos in his wake. Store owners cowered, customers scattered like pigeons at a breadcrumb convention. Ken Rex, he just chuckled, probably thinking, these people need to learn to appreciate performance art. He was a one-man retail apocalypse, and the only thing missing was a shopping cart chariot and a flaming torch. His weapon of choice? The dine and dash, but instead of dine, it was threaten. And instead of dash, it was saunter out slowly while making direct eye contact. He once ate a whole rotisserie chicken in the store, leaving the bones on the counter, claiming it was pre-seasoned. Skidmore wasn't exactly a bustling metropolis. People knew their neighbors' cows, and which one of those cows was Bessie, notorious for her side eye and questionable milk. So when livestock started disappearing, folks knew it wasn't a case of bovine wanderlust. Enter Ken Rex, stage left, or maybe just emerging from the woods behind your barn, with a freezer full of suspiciously familiar-looking cuts of meat. He'd offer to sell it back to you, at a discount, because he was a businessman after all, even if his business model was acquire and resell to the original owner. Farmers grumbled, they cursed, they considered taking matters into their own hands. But Ken Rex, he just smiled wider, probably counting his ill-gotten gains and planning his next barbecue. He was the Robin Hood of rustling, except he kept everything for himself and probably charged the sheriff a delivery fee for the arrow he used to pin the "I stole your cow" note to the sheriff's door. Tractors, the lifeblood of any self-respecting farming community. And Ken Rex? He treated them like library books borrowed without permission, returned damaged, and with a hefty late fee, which he, of course, never paid. One day, Old Man Withers, who loved his tractor more than his dentures, woke up to find it missing, vanished, gone to that big farm auction in the sky. Except it wasn't in the sky, it was parked in front of the courthouse, adorned with a banner that read, "Ken Rex McElroy, making Skidmore great again, one stolen tractor at a time." The town was flabbergasted. The audacity, the sheer gall, the blatant disregard for parking regulations. Even the judge, who had a soft spot for antique law books and even older whiskey, was impressed. Almost. Love is a battlefield, but in Ken Rex's case, it was more like a hostage situation with a marriage license. He fell for Trina McLeod, a girl 15 years his junior, who must have had a thing for bad boys. Or maybe just a severe lack of good judgment.
Her parents, understandably, weren't thrilled. They said no to the relationship with the kind of conviction usually reserved for telemarketers and door-to-door salespeople.
Ken Rex's response? He shot up their house with a shotgun. Because nothing says "I love your daughter" like a few ounces of buckshot and a healthy dose of property damage. They eloped, naturally, because nothing screams romance like running from the law and dodging angry relatives. It was a match made in, well, not heaven, but somewhere with a lot more arson and slightly less harp music. Ken Rex's crimes were like a bad case of the hiccups. Annoying, persistent, and no one could figure out how to make them stop. He'd been arrested, sure, but he always walked free. He knew the law better than a tax lawyer at a casino, exploiting loopholes like a kid in a candy store with a pocket full of coupons.
The trial for shooting at the grocer, Old Man Johnson, who dared to ask Ken Rex to pay for his milk, the audacity, was the talk of the town. Witnesses lined up, evidence was presented, even Bessie the cow showed up, ready to testify, though no one could decipher her moo testimony.
The verdict? Not guilty. Turns out, shooting a warning shot over a gallon of milk was perfectly legal in Skidmore. Or at least Ken Rex could argue it was. He walked out of the courtroom a free man, probably humming a jaunty tune and pocketing the bailiff's pen for good measure. One hot summer day, Ken Rex decided to grace the town with his presence. He swaggered into the D&G Tavern, a place where the beer was cold, the gossip was hot, and the chances of encountering Ken Rex were usually slim to none. This day, however, the odds were not in the patron's favor.
He sat at the bar, ordered a beer, and proceeded to regale everyone with tales of his exploits, because even criminals need to brag sometimes.
The music stopped. Conversations died down. The bartender, a man named Dale who had a penchant for Hawaiian shirts and a surprising tolerance for Ken Rex's shenanigans, slowly polished a glass, his face a mask of weary resignation. It was like a scene from a western, the air thick with tension, anticipation, and the faint scent of spilled beer and impending doom. Except, instead of a duel at high noon, it was just Ken Rex, holding court, and everyone else holding their breath.
Living with Ken Rex as a constant threat was like having a wasp nest in your living room. You knew it was there, you knew it was dangerous, but no one wanted to be the one to poke it.
Fear hung over Skidmore thicker than humidity on a July afternoon. Conversation stopped abruptly when his name came up, replaced by nervous glances and the clinking of glasses.
Folks started investing in deadbolt locks and guard dogs. Rumours flew faster than a squirrel with its tail on fire. Had Ken Rex really rigged the town's water supply with itching powder? Did he replace the church organ music with poker? No one knew for sure, but with Ken Rex, the impossible had a funny way of becoming reality.
The town was a pressure cooker, and Ken Rex was the heat, cranked up high and left unattended. The question wasn't if things would boil over, but when. And everyone, even those too scared to admit it, was holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Sheriff Sam Gunter, bless his heart, was a good man. He believed in law and order, apple pie, and the power of a firm handshake. He was also about as equipped to handle Ken Rex McElroy as a goldfish was to navigate a hurricane.
Every encounter between the two was like watching a slapstick routine gone wrong. Ken Rex would taunt, I would sputter, warrants would be issued, then promptly ignored. It was a dance as old as time, or at least as old as Skidmore, where time seemed to move a little slower, especially when Ken Rex was involved.
Once, the sheriff swore he had Ken Rex dead to rights, caught red-handed stealing a tractor. Turns out, Ken Rex had legally purchased the tractor that morning, using the sheriff's own credit card, which he'd borrowed a few weeks prior. The only thing the sheriff arrested that day was his own frustration, along with a hefty dose of humiliation. Justice in Skidmore, like most things, moved at its own pace. Patience was a virtue, especially when dealing with a legal system that seemed to have more loopholes than a crocheted doily. But even the most patient folks have their limits.
The straw that broke the camel's back, or in this case, the farmer's patience, was when Ken Rex shot Bo Miller's prize-winning rooster, Ralph. Now, Ralph wasn't just any rooster. He was a champion crower, a feathered alarm clock, and Bo's pride and joy. Shooting Ralph was like spitting in the face of Skidmore itself.
That's when the whispers turned to murmurs, the murmurs to grumbles, and the grumbles to full-blown, "We've had enough" pronouncements. Even the town drunk, Old Man Willie, who swore Ken Rex was his long-lost nephew, he wasn't, agreed that something had to be done. It was a dark and stormy night. Okay, maybe it was a Tuesday afternoon, sunny with a slight chance of hail, but the mood in the back room of the D&G Tavern was about as cheerful as a funeral parlor on tax day.
The town's elders, along with anyone who'd ever had a fence broken, a cow stolen, or a rooster shot by Ken Rex McElroy, gathered in secret.
They came not as friends or neighbours, but as a community pushed to the edge, ready to take back their town, one illegal parking ticket at a time.
The tension was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife, assuming Ken Rex hadn't stolen it already.
Ideas were tossed around like hot potatoes, most of them illegal, a few downright dangerous, and one involving a very large butterfly net and an even larger deportation plan, to where no one was quite sure.
After hours of debate, fueled by lukewarm coffee and even colder fear, a decision was reached.
They would confront Ken Rex as a united front and demand he leave Skidmore never to return.
It was a long shot, about as likely to succeed as teaching a pig to sing opera, but it was all they had.
The plan was simple, almost comically so. They would corner Ken Rex at the D&G Tavern. Where else? He was a creature of habit, after all, and his habit was to terrorize the town, one beer at a time.
They would appeal to his sense of reason, his humanity, his love for all things Skidmore, which, let's face it, was probably a very short list.
Would it work? Doubtful. Was it dangerous? Undeniably. But as Old Man Willie, who'd already finished his second pot of coffee and was working on a tower of sugar cubes, put it, what's the worst that could happen? He steals our dentures and sues us for emotional distress?
Word spread through Skidmore faster than a rumor in a barber shop. The plan was afoot, the die was cast, the metaphorical fat was in the fire.
A strange sense of anticipation settled over the town, a mixture of fear, excitement, and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rid themselves of Ken Rex McElroy once and for all.
The day of the confrontation dawned bright and clear, the sky a mockingly cheerful blue. The D&G Tavern, usually bustling with activity, was eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the nervous tapping of a foot or the clinking of a glass.
The air was thick with unspoken words, shared glances, and the overwhelming sense that something big, something life-changing, was about to happen.
The clock ticked down, the minutes felt like hours, the seconds like eons, and in the eye of the storm, Ken Rex McElroy, oblivious or perhaps just indifferent to the gathering storm clouds, enjoyed a cold beer, completely unaware that this day, this very moment, was about to change everything. It was a scorcher of a day in Skidmore, the kind of heat that melted asphalt and turned tempers into simmering cauldrons of resentment. Even the flies seemed sluggish, too exhausted to do much more than buzz irritably around Ken Rex McElroy as he held court at the D&G Tavern.
He sat there in his usual spot, a throne of beer-stained wood and faded vinyl, like a perverse king surveying his domain.
The air crackled with a tension so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife if Ken Rex hadn't already stolen all the town's cutlery, for safekeeping he'd once claimed.
The usual tavern sounds, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the sporadic bursts of laughter from Old Man Willie, were replaced by a silence so profound it felt like the whole town was holding its breath.
Even the jukebox seemed to sense the impending drama, refusing to play anything other than mournful country ballads. The townspeople, their faces a mixture of grim determination and barely suppressed fear, gathered outside the tavern like extras in a low-budget western. They'd rehearsed this moment in their minds 1,000 times, each imagining themselves as the hero, the one to finally stand up to Ken Rex.
But now, faced with the reality of the situation, all those fantasies seemed to evaporate like spit on a hot skillet.
The weight of years of fear, resentment, and frustration hung heavy in the air, a toxic cloud that threatened to suffocate any flicker of bravery.
The plan, such as it was, had been simple: confront Ken Rex, demand he leave Skidmore, and pray he didn't decide to add arson to his ever-growing list of offences.
It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had, fueled by a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this time things would be different. The silence was shattered by the creak of the tavern door swinging open. Ken Rex emerged, squinting in the harsh sunlight, a half-finished beer in his hand. He looked around at the assembled crowd, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face, like a man being interrupted during his favorite television program. Before anyone could speak, before the tension could break into chaos, a single gunshot rang out. The sound ripped through the heavy air, echoing off the buildings, bouncing around the town square until it seemed to reverberate in the very bones of Skidmore itself. Time seemed to stop. The world froze, caught in that single, heart-stopping moment between the pull of a trigger and the realization of what had just transpired. Ken Rex McElroy, the terror of Skidmore, stood frozen for a heartbeat, a look of disbelief etched on his face, before crumpling to the ground like a discarded marionette. For a moment, there was only silence, thick and heavy, broken only by the rasping breaths of the townspeople as they struggled to comprehend what they had just witnessed.
Then, as if released from a spell, the world exploded into a cacophony of sound and movement.
People screamed, some in terror, some in disbelief, some in a kind of primal release that had been building for years.
Children clung to their parents, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. Dogs barked, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere.
In the midst of the chaos, no one seemed to notice or perhaps care who had fired the fatal shot.
It was as if the collective will of the town itself had manifested in that single, deadly act, a culmination of years of fear and resentment finding its ultimate, an utterly unexpected release.
The most shocking thing about the whole ordeal, no one left.
It wasn't a bang and run situation, it was more of a bang and let's have a town meeting about this whole thing situation.
Sheriff Sam Gunter, usually the epitome of bewildered authority, simply stood there scratching his head.
Because in Skidmore, on that day, justice didn't run. It stood there surrounded by a crowd of bewildered, relieved, and slightly terrified townspeople.
The investigation into Ken Rex's demise was like watching a dog chase its tail. Lots of frantic activity, very little progress, and a lingering suspicion that someone had replaced the brain cells with chew toys.
Sheriff Sam Gunter, bless his heart, tackled the case with the same zeal he usually reserved for solving crossword puzzles and avoiding his wife's fruitcake.
He interviewed the townspeople, each more tight-lipped than the last, their stories as airtight as a colander full of Swiss cheese.
Evidence scattered, to put it mildly.
There were more bullet casings than witnesses willing to talk, and even Bessie the cow, when questioned, just mooed mournfully and refused to make eye contact.
The whole thing was a bigger mess than a raccoon in a confetti factory, and about as easy to clean up.
Despite a lack of cooperation and a chaotic crime scene, Sheriff Gunter rounded up a suspect, Old Man Willie.
Willie, known for his tall tales and love of pancakes, was an easy target.
Even the town drunk couldn't have shot straight enough to hit Ken Rex McElroy.
The trial was more like a community theater production of The Case of the Missing Witness. The jury, all victims of Ken Rex's antics, deliberated for 10 minutes before delivering a not guilty verdict. With Ken Rex gone, you'd think Skidmore would erupt in joyous celebration, a town finally free from its tormentor. But the reality was far less dramatic and a lot more boring. Sure, folks were relieved. They could leave their doors unlocked, their cows unchained, and their roosters unshot at. But the fear, that constant low-grade hum of anxiety that had become the town's soundtrack, had been replaced by a strange emptiness.
It was like watching the season finale of a really juicy soap opera, only to realize the show had been canceled. What were they supposed to talk about now? The weather? The price of soybeans? The shocking lack of crime? It was all so mundane.
Even Old Man Willie, deprived of his favourite nemesis, seemed to have lost his spark, spending his days muttering about conspiracies and the good old days when a guy could get shot without causing a town-wide existential crisis.
Legends like fruitcakes and bad haircuts stick around long after their expiration date. Ken Rex McElroy became the ultimate cautionary tale, the ghost story whispered around campfires. Tourists flocked to Skidmore, hoping to glimpse the infamous D&G Tavern, the bullet hole now a shrine with empty beer bottles and faded photos. The town embraced its notoriety, selling "I Survived Ken Rex" t-shirts and offering tours of his infamous crime scenes. Ken Rex became a legend, a reminder that truth is stranger than fiction. So, what's the moral of the story? That in a town where the law moves slower than molasses in January, sometimes you have to take matters into your own hands? Vigilante justice, while frowned upon, is occasionally the only language a certain kind of outlaw understands. Even in a place as small as Skidmore, Missouri, the line between right and wrong is rarely clear-cut. It's a messy, complicated tapestry woven from fear, desperation, and misplaced bullet casings. In the end, Ken Rex McElroy's story isn't about justice or the lack thereof. It's about choices, consequences, and the enduring power of a good story, told with dark humor and a shot of whiskey.